Okay guys, so now we're going to learn about the var keyword in Java 21. So let's create a quick project for that. We'll call it var keyword. Let's call it var, just var. Let's add some sample code. Let's press create. Cool. So if you guys haven't watched the previous tutorials in this series, please go back and watch those. They will provide context and be more helpful to understand this. So in Java 10, which we're currently on version 21, var is used for sort of variable type inference. So you know how we'll usually create a variable, we'll go like int number equals 10. And we know the type of the variable by the data type that we've prefixed it with, which we can see it's an integer by int. And then when we initialize it, we have this number 10, and this is an integer called number that has the value of 10. Pretty simple. Now, the var keyword allows us to infer the type based off of the contents of the initialized value. So for example, we could do the exact same thing by typing var number2 equals 20 or 210. And these two are effectively the same thing. This is still an int, and this is still an int as well. But we're able to use this var keyword, and it will almost infer the type of this given the value. So for example, if we hover over that while pressing Command if you're on Mac or Control if you're on Windows, you can see that it knows it's an int. Now, similarly, if we wanted this to be a float, we'll go 2.2f, and we'll hover over it, and there we go. It's a float without us having to change this data type. Now, this is not to be confused with other languages like JavaScript where we can change the type of the variable. Number2 can now only be a float. So, for example, if we wanted to go like 2.2L, then obviously that's not allowed because we're trying to change from a float to a long. But also, we provided a double, but it wants a float, sorry, not a long. So for example, if we went 2L, then that is still a float, right? So if we then go number 2 equals, I don't know, hello, right? We'll make it a completely different type. We can see that we'll get an error because, you know, it's expecting a float and we gave it a string. So it's type inference, but it doesn't make the type of the variable itself elastic. This will always be an integer. But we can use this var keyword to have it infer that. Now, why might this be useful? Well, for example, if we had a really long object, right? So let's create an object that just has nothing in it, right? So we'll go Java class. We'll call this super duper duper long object name, right? Let's say we have this super duper duper long object name. We won't put anything in this class because it's just a dummy class. If we were to do it the traditional way without using var, we go like super duper duper long object name, and then we'll give the name for our variable. We'll call it variable. We'll go equals new super duper duper long object name. Now obviously this is valid. You might not see something so wrong with this, but we've repeated this word super duper duper long object name twice, when really we can just go like this and it already knows that this is of type super duper duper long object name because we've included it here. And it's the same, you know, with a integer, so we'll call it integer equals 10, right? It is the same for an array as well. So we can go, or not an array, sorry, a list, right? We'll call it a list. So we'll go var numbers equals new array list. But obviously right now, this is just a list without a type, right? It's just a generic object. We can make this an array list of integers. And then now we'll have an array list of integers. And we can go ahead and use that array list as we would a normal list. Like that. And we can print it out. And we can run it. And everything works as intended. Now, the only times you can use var are in local variables. So that's variables within methods. That's important. We can't go up here in the class and have a var field. It's not how it works. We have to have it locally because the fields up here, the actual class fields, might not be initialized. So we can't use var if we're not initializing on that line. Otherwise it can't figure out what this variable actually is. We also can't have an empty var. So it has to be initialized. We can't just be like var empty and then not initialize it because it needs to know the type, right? If we did that, it would become valid, but if we had it as just null, it cannot resolve that. It doesn't know. So we cannot use it there. We also can't use it as a parameter or a return type within a method. So if we create a dummy method here, we'll go private void dummy, right? Or let's say private string dummy, right? So we return a string, and here we just return done, right? This is obviously a valid method, but we can't go ahead and just replace this. We have to be explicit in our return type if it is a method. So we can't use var up here as a return type. We also cannot use var if we're passing in a parameter. So we can't just be like var parameter 1 and it will infer it because it doesn't know, right? So we need to be explicit in our type there. And let's say this is a string, right? So it will only ever affect variables within a method like this. Let me just move all of this to that method right here. We can only declare var within a method as a local variable. And it cannot be empty and it cannot be passed as a parameter. Everything else still has to be explicit. So hopefully you understand var a bit better now. If you have any questions, put a comment below. Again, this is one of those optional things. We don't have to use it. We can just use the standard in. We can just use the super duper long object name. Like that. The actual function of the code doesn't change. So yeah, hopefully you liked that, guys. See you in the next one. And also the error here, by the way, is just because we haven't returned a string. There we go.